At first glance, it's just another family portrait from 1919, a smiling mother, a stern father, and a baby in his christening gown. But look closer, not at the faces, but at the gilded mirror glinting behind them. The infant's gaze isn't on the photographer, it's fixed on the reflection where a shadow leans in, though the father himself sits perfectly still. His eyes seem wide, not with curiosity, but as if he sees something no adult in the room can. What do you think? Was it simply light and glass, or the first glimpse of a secret this family never spoke aloud? The October sun filtered through the tall oaks of Chestnut Hill, scattering dust motes across the Fairchild estate like flecks of gold. A hushed tension hung in the air as buyers drifted through its corridors, whispering over porcelain dolls and heavy clocks. For most, this was a treasure hunt. For Nora Delgado, it was something else, the possibility of finding what others overlooked. She had missed a crucial clue once in a tragic photograph from 1908. She would not miss it again. The library smelled of wood polish and time itself. On a mahogany desk among the scattered frames, one silver-bordered photograph waited. Nora lifted it carefully. The glass was colder than she expected, a sharp chill that traveled into her fingertips. The loose hinge of the frame gave a faint metallic squeal. As she tilted it, fine dust leapt into the sunbeam, swirling like a cloud disturbed after decades of silence. She shivered before she even looked inside. At first glance, the portrait seemed ordinary. A young mother, Lillian Fairchild, in a drop-waist dress. Her husband, Edward, rigid in a three-piece suit. The infant, Henry, in a long christening gown of lace. It could have been anyone's family holiday card in 1919. But then came the first discovery, the child's gaze. Henry's eyes were not on the lens, not on his mother's smile. They tilted away upward, leftward, locked on something else entirely. Nora's eyes followed his, to the edge of the frame where the gilded wall mirror shimmered faintly. In that reflection, Edward's shadow leaned forward unnaturally, though his real body in the portrait sat perfectly still. A presence pressing in where it shouldn't be. Then a flare. A narrow streak of light across the mirror's silver that cut like a blade, harsher than the soft east window glow bathing the family. Not halation, not age spots. The spectrum was wrong sharp where it should be muted. The mirror seemed to say what the family would not. The mirror disagrees. Nora swallowed hard. She knew photographic tricks well enough to doubt her own eyes. Double exposure ghosting from aged silver, halide flare from an old Petzval lens, even reflections bouncing from window glass. But none of it explained the angle, the proximity, the unnatural lean of that shadow. Physics said one thing, the mirror told another. She flipped the frame. The back carried an embossed mark, H.J. Lewandowski, Philadelphia. A date, Nov 12, 1919. Names written in slanted script, Edward and Lillian Fairchild, baby Henry. Below, faint graphite Christmas cards. The board smelled faintly sweet, resinous. Nora bent closer, inhaling. Camphor. Paregoric. Her pen scrawled quickly in her notebook, names, date, mirror, anomaly, and then almost under her breath. Why would a christening portrait smell faintly of opium? She leaned back, pulse racing, the stakes pressed down on her. She remembered the case she had missed in 1908, when a photograph in her possession had concealed a crucial detail about a child's death. She had vowed never again to ignore the whispers in an image. That evening, back in her Pine Street shop, Nora placed the portrait under her work lamp. The baby's eyes met hers with unnerving clarity, a silent plea across 100 years. She knew she couldn't decode this alone. Her fingers dialed the number for Dr. Maya Patel, the University of Pennsylvania's specialist in early 20th century photography. "I found a Lewandowski print," Nora explained, voice low. "The infant isn't looking at the camera. He's staring into a mirror. And in that mirror, the father leans in, though his body sits perfectly still." On the other end, Patel's voice sharpened. "Bring it tomorrow morning." Lewandowski was known for capturing what others missed. "I want to see it for myself, and if there's retouching India ink plaster fill, we'll know." Sometimes the edits reveal more than the image. Nora hung up and glanced again at Henry's expression. The child's eyes seemed to widen as if aware she had noticed. Her lamp reflected off the glass, overlaying her own face with his. For a fleeting instant, she felt the mirror watching her too. Some pictures are taken once and developed forever. The morning sun bled across the Gothic spires of the University of Pennsylvania as Nora carried the Fairchild portrait under her arm. Inside the hushed corridors of the History of Photography lab, she met Dr. Maya Patel, a professor known for her obsessive attention to detail. Patel's workspace resembled less a modern office than a shrine to the evolution of the camera, brass-bodied stereoscopes, daguerreotype cases, and a wall of contact prints that spanned 100 years. Patel took the photograph in gloved hands, her dark eyes narrowing as she tilted it against the light. "Lewandowski's embossing definitely authentic," she murmured, "and this is a silver gelatin print contact exposed from a glass plate. See the rich tonal range, the subtle depth." She set it carefully beneath a cross-polarized lamp, the laboratory's white glow refracting off the glass like surgical light. Nora watched as Patel adjusted a magnifier over the baby's face. The child's eyes, even under enlargement, seemed startlingly alert. "Most infants," this young Patel explained, "don't lock focus in this way. Their gaze tends to drift. But Henry is fixated on something specific off-axis. He isn't curious. He's bracing. Look at his lip tension, that micro-quiver. That's anticipatory distress." Nora leaned in. "He's looking into the mirror." "Yes." And the reflection tells a second story. Patel shifted her scope toward the gilded border. "See here, that faint hand shape. It's not in the main frame, but it's visible in the mirror. That's the father's hand closer to the baby than the staged pose suggests. The mirror effectively betrays the composition." Nora felt a cold prickle rise along her arms. "So it wasn't just an accident of light." Patel tapped another section. "Notice this halo halation flare is usually from overexposure or uneven reflection, but the source is too sharp for window light. Lewandowski must have used an additional reflector or lamp, yet the glare is localized right where the mirror captures the father's arm. That's deliberate, or at least unusual." She lifted the print from its mount, inhaling slightly. "Do you smell that?" Nora did. The faint sweetness, resinous, almost medicinal. It tugged at a memory she had cataloged in countless estate sales. "Camphor," she whispered. Patel nodded. "Yes, this board carries residue. Camphor is not uncommon in early photographic materials, but the intensity here suggests contact with something else. And in 1918, what household liquid carried camphor more reliably than anything else?" Nora answered slowly. "Paregoric." A silence spread between them, heavy with implication. Paregoric, the so-called soothing syrup, had been given to fussy infants, masking cries while suppressing their breathing. Entire generations had trusted it, unaware of the dangers, but in excess, it could do far more than soothe. Patel broke the silence. "The photographic record itself isn't proof of poisoning, but it captures dynamics, fear tension, maybe even a pattern we can test against history." She set the photo back under the lamp. "This is your map. Now we find the landmarks." Together they sketched the next steps. First, the archives of the Philadelphia Inquirer. Obituary society pages and birth announcements often concealed truths behind euphemism. Next, the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts PAFA, where Lewandowski's surviving ledgers might be stored. His meticulous records were legendary names fees, technical notes, sometimes even personal observations about his clients. And finally, property deeds. The Fairchild townhouse off Rittenhouse Square might still stand its walls holding whispers of what happened a century ago. Nora spent the afternoon unspooling reels of microfilm at the library. The crackle of the machine's gears accompanied the rolling decades of headlines: post-war strikes, influenza remnants, prohibition debates. Then a small notice in the December 4th, 1919 edition caught her breath. Henry Fairchild, infant son of Edward and Lillian Fairchild, passed peacefully in his sleep. December 3rd. Services private. The words carried the practiced politeness of the era. But Nora's chest tightened. Less than 3 weeks after the photograph was taken, the baby was dead. Her fingers trembled as she traced the line again. Passed peacefully. But she remembered Henry's eyes in the photo, not peaceful, not blank, alert, wary, almost pleading, and she remembered the smell of camphor. That evening, Nora returned to her Pine Street shop, spreading her notes across the workbench. She circled the date, Dec 3, 1919, and linked it with the word paregoric. Beneath, she wrote in capital letters, "Mirror." For a moment, she stared at the photograph again, its surface catching the amber glow of her desk lamp. In the mirror's reflection, she could almost imagine movement, the faint curve of a bottle cradled in Edward's palm. The room felt close, the tick of her wall clock suddenly loud like a heartbeat, echoing the child's silent fear. Nora closed her eyes. She knew this was only the beginning. Tomorrow she would seek out the Fairchild home itself. Some houses keep secrets in their walls, and she had the uneasy sense that the old townhouse had been waiting a century for someone to listen. Rittenhouse Square was buzzing with afternoon life when Nora approached the limestone facade of the Fairchild townhouse. Children darted past with penny whistles, their laughter echoing off cobblestones, oblivious to the shadows clinging to the upper windows of the old residence. The building had been renovated decades earlier into luxury apartments, yet its bones remained unmistakably early 20th century. Heavy cornices crowned the windows, and the wrought iron balcony still sagged slightly as though bearing the weight of memory. Waiting at the entrance was Dr. Claire Nguyen, a neonatologist at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and the current owner of the former Fairchild residence. She greeted Nora warmly, but her eyes betrayed curiosity and caution. "I've read your email," Claire said, holding the door open. "When I bought this unit, I was warned the house had stories. You're not the first to ask about the Fairchilds, but you might be the first to bring evidence." Inside the townhouse revealed a careful blend of past and present. Refinished hardwood floors gleamed under modern chandeliers, yet the crown moldings and marble fireplace remained intact. Claire led Nora through the living room, stopping near the far wall. "This is where the portrait was most likely staged," she said, gesturing toward a section of plaster where faint rectangular discoloration lingered. "The mirror niche is original. The gilded frame is long gone, but the mounting holes are still visible." Nora pulled the photograph from its protective sleeve and held it up against the wall. The geometry aligned almost perfectly the windows, the mantel, the alcove where the mirror had once hung. She shivered. The room was brighter now, filled with 21st century life, but her mind overlaid the sepia tones of 1919, the stiff sofa, the baby's uneasy gaze. Claire motioned for her to follow down the hall. They entered a smaller room, now serving as Claire's home office. She stopped before a section of wall where glass panels displayed preserved wallpaper. "This was the nursery," she explained. "When I renovated, I found something disturbing behind the plaster. I had it preserved because I couldn't ignore it. The wallpaper was delicate, tiny floral patterns faded to near invisibility. But Nora's breath caught when she noticed the interruptions. Faint smudges clustered at the height of an infant's crib. Tiny fingerprints. "They're child-sized," Claire said softly. "Too small to be anyone else's." And here she pointed to another patch higher up. "Irregular stains larger than a handprint. These are at adult height." Claire reached into a drawer and produced lab results. "I had them tested mostly out of professional curiosity. They came back positive for opiates, specifically traces consistent with paregoric. That's why I kept this wall intact, because I couldn't shake the feeling this room itself was trying to tell a story." Nora touched the glass over the wallpaper, her fingers trembling. It was one thing to suspect another, to see evidence literally embedded in the house. The ghostly fingerprints seemed to reach out as though the children themselves had pressed against the walls, leaving their silent marks. "And there's more," Claire added. She retrieved a folder from the bookshelf and carefully removed a folded sheet of yellowed stationery. This was discovered in a frame backing during renovation. A letter from Lillian Fairchild to her sister Eleanor, dated December 3, 1919, the very day Henry died. Nora unfolded the fragile paper. The ink wavered, the handwriting shaky. "Dearest Eleanor, I cannot bear the scent in this house any longer. Sweet cloying, it hangs over Henry's crib like a veil. Edward says it soothes him that I am overwrought, but when I lifted my baby tonight, his skin was cold, his breath shallow. I begged Edward to call the doctor, but he said it was only sleep. He sent me away, told me to rest. When I returned, Henry was gone. I know in my bones this was no act of God, no accident. The bottle was in Edward's hand, that same vial tonic he calls medicine. I fear what more he may do, and I pray you will keep these words safe in case I cannot." The letter ended abruptly, a jagged line where the pen had torn the page. Nora read it twice, her chest tightening, her throat dry. Here was not just suspicion, but an accusation written by the child's own mother. Claire's expression was grave. "I've worked in neonatal intensive care for 15 years. I know what crib death looks like, but 2 infants in the same family within 2 years, both under suspicious circumstances. That's not a chance. That's a pattern." Nora slid the letter back into its protective sleeve, her hand still shaking. She thought again of the mirror in the portrait, the father's shadow leaning closer. The infant's eyes wide with something more than infantile confusion. Fear. Recognition. a warning caught by the camera and ignored by everyone else in the room. The house had spoken through its walls, through its stained wallpaper and hidden letters. But Nora knew she needed corroboration beyond suspicion, beyond anecdote. There was one man who might have seen more than anyone intended: the photographer himself. If Lewandowski's studio records had survived, they might contain the final confirmation. She turned to Claire. "Do you know if Lewandowski's archives still exist?" Claire nodded slowly. "If they do, they'd be at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. Lewandowski donated some of his materials before his death. If his ledgers are intact, they might hold what you're looking for." Nora folded the photograph against her chest. The mirror, the wallpaper, the letter, they were fragments of a puzzle. The next step was finding the voice of the man behind the camera. The reading room at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts was hushed, its high ceilings echoing with the faint creak of chairs and the rustle of archival gloves. Nora sat across from Samuel Green, the Academy's senior archivist, who slid a large leather-bound ledger across the polished table. "Lewandowski was meticulous," he said in a near whisper, as though not to disturb the spirits of the past. "He recorded every sitting, every technical detail. If the Fairchild session is here, it will speak volumes." Nora leaned forward as Samuel flipped carefully through pages of slanted handwriting and neat numerical columns. Wedding parties, military portraits, businessmen with their wives. Then, mid-November 1919, Samuel's finger paused. "Here," he murmured. The entry was brief but chilling. "Nov 12, 1919, Edward and Lillian Fairchild, infant son Henry. Commission holiday cards. Deposit $42. Notes, east window light supplemented with reflector." The infant agitated when the father approached. Mother requested child alone poses. Father, impatient, insisted on family unity. Unusual tension during sitting. Suggested reschedule, refused. Nora's pulse quickened. Even the photographer had noticed. Samuel turned another sheet, producing a carbon copy of a private note Lewandowski had written to himself the day after the session. Mrs. F. requested omission of certain plates. The infant's distress was notable. Mirror glare peculiar revealed father's hand nearer than posed. The atmosphere was tense. Nora felt her throat tighten. Lewandowski had seen it. He may not have understood the full danger, but he had recognized that something was wrong. Samuel retrieved a slim folder marked Correspondence. Inside was a letter on cream stationery signed in delicate hand, Lillian Fairchild, dated November 25, 1919. Nora read aloud. "Dear Mr. Lewandowski, I write to request all negatives from our recent sitting. My husband insists they be destroyed, but I beg you to preserve at least one copy privately. Should anyone ever question the truth, your records may matter. Please do not speak of this to Edward. I enclose additional payment for your discretion. With gratitude, LF." The words vibrated with quiet desperation. Lillian had known she might need evidence even if she could never say it aloud. Nora's eyes met Samuel's. He only shook his head gravely. "She was trying to leave a trace," he said. It seemed she trusted the camera more than the law. From the academy, Nora walked to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, where she requested society pages from late 1919. There, beneath advertisements for Christmas furs and prohibition debates, she found a tiny announcement. "Mr. and Mrs. Edward Fairchild will spend the season abroad following the unfortunate loss of their infant son. Mrs. Fairchild's physician recommends a change of climate." It was the language of concealment, polite words for a woman crumbling. Yet behind the lines, Nora could hear the echo of Lillian's letter: suspicion, fear, isolation. But Edward's name appeared elsewhere too. In business columns, he was described as a financier, involved in shipping and steel investments, a man rumored to be overextended. Lawsuits whispered at the edges of his empire. Insurance notices marked his interests: child endowment policies, life insurance premiums. The pattern unsettled Nora deeply. When she returned to her shop that evening, she spread the evidence on her work table: the portrait, the ledger notes, Lillian's desperate letter. The pieces fit together with grim precision. A wealthy man under financial strain. 2 infant deaths within 2 years. A wife confined by expectations and dismissed as nervous. A photographer who saw fear in a child's eyes and was asked to suppress certain images. Yet she knew she could not pursue this story alone. The evidence was building towards something larger, something that demanded a legal mind to weigh its implications. Nora thought of Lieutenant Olivia Park, a cold case investigator she had once consulted on another estate find. If anyone could frame this not as curiosity but as a credible pattern, it was her. That night she called. Olivia listened quietly as Nora laid out the findings. The wallpaper stained with paregoric traces, the diary letter, the photographer's ledger. "I can't arrest a man dead for 70 years, Olivia finally said, but I can tell you this. The profile matches what we call today a family annihilator, someone who eliminates children or spouses seen as obstacles, often for control or financial gain." Nora stared again at Henry's gaze in the photograph at the mirror, revealing a hand that should not have been there. Olivia's words reverberated. "A baby doesn't fake fear, Nora. That expression is evidence in its own right." And still, one question gnawed at her. If Lillian had tried so hard to leave traces, what else might she have left behind? Diaries, fragments, secrets passed down through her sister's line. Somewhere out there, perhaps a descendant carried the missing pieces of her story. The email arrived just 3 days later. Its subject line, plain but electrifying. "Ashford Family Papers urgent." The sender introduced herself as Dr. Caroline Ashford, a retired psychiatrist living in Boston. She explained that her great-grandmother had been Eleanor Ashford, sister to Lillian Fairchild. For decades, Caroline's family had quietly preserved a trove of correspondence that had never been made public. When she heard whispers of Nora's investigation through the local historical community, she knew the time had come to share what they had guarded in silence. They arranged to meet at Nora's shop. Caroline arrived carrying a weathered cedar box wrapped in twine. Her eyes, sharp and reflective, hinted at years of research into her own lineage. She set the box down gently as though it were fragile flesh rather than paper. "Lillian was my great-grand-aunt," Caroline said. "My family passed these letters down piece by piece, but we never spoke of them openly. I think she wanted her truth hidden until someone could finally believe it." Inside were stacks of folded sheets, each marked with dates ranging from October to December 1919. These were not ordinary letters. They were fragments of a diary written in Lillian's unsteady hand and mailed to Eleanor in pieces. Perhaps she had feared discovery. Perhaps she had known her husband controlled too much to risk keeping a bound volume. Whatever the reason, these scattered entries spoke with a trembling voice across a century. Nora unfolded the first, dated October 30th, 1919. "Henry sleeps too heavily after Edward's drops. He calls them soothing, but I dread the stillness. He tells me I am hysterical, that I see shadows where there are none. Yet my arms know the truth. A baby should not lie so still." Another entry from November 12th, the day of the portrait. "We sat for Mr. Lewandowski today. I insisted Henry be included, though Edward was reluctant. He said a crying baby would ruin the picture. When Edward leaned close, Henry began to cry, not from hunger but from fear. Mr. Lewandowski noticed, kind enough to take some plates of just Henry and me. Edward was displeased. He spoke of sending copies to his investors as though Henry were a prop in some advertisement. I pray the photographer's lens has captured what my words cannot." Nora's chest tightened as she traced the ink, remembering the hand in the mirror, the baby's wary stare. Caroline passed her another sheet, dated November 27th. "I found the brown bottle again in Edward's desk. Small glass with faint scratches around the neck as though measured often. The smell, sickly sweet camphor clinging to my clothes even after I set it down. He says it is for his nerves, but I have never seen him drink it. He gives it to Henry at night instead. My baby's cries soften then vanish. It feels like watching life retreat behind his eyes." Nora swallowed hard. These were not the rants of a nervous wife. They were meticulous observations of patterns, physical evidence captured in words. Then came the entry from December 2nd, 1919. "Edward insisted he take Henry tonight so that I might sleep. His kindness was false, his smile cold. I watched him rock Henry, the bottle glinting in his hand. He said I worry too much, that mothers imagine sickness. I wanted to snatch Henry away, but Edward's gaze stopped me. He looked at me as though I too were in his way. The final sheet was smeared with ink as though written in haste. If anything happens, Eleanor, know that I tried. I begged him. I pleaded. But he sees in Henry not a child but an obstacle. Pray for us. I fear tomorrow will be too late." Nora lowered the paper, her hands trembling. The next day, December 3rd. Henry had been declared dead in his crib. Lieutenant Olivia Park joined them later that afternoon to review the documents. She listened in silence, her jaw tightening. "This isn't coincidence," she said finally. "Two infants, the same method, the same father. And the language control, isolation, financial stress. In modern criminology, we'd call this coercive control, escalating to infanticide." Caroline's voice broke as she added, Lillian wrote, as if no one would believe her. Women of her time were dismissed as hysterical if they spoke against their husbands. She must have felt trapped, silenced. Olivia nodded. "That's exactly how perpetrators maintain power. What strikes me most is the foresight Lillian tried to scatter her diary to leave a breadcrumb trail. She knew she might not survive her marriage, but she wanted the truth to survive her." Nora glanced at the photograph on her workbench. Baby Henry's eyes fixed on the mirror seemed to echo those desperate words. A child who could not speak, a mother who could not be heard, and a father who knew both truths were invisible to society. The room fell into a heavy silence until Olivia leaned forward. "There's one more voice we haven't heard yet, the negative itself. If Lewandowski kept his plates, the glass might reveal details the print obscures. Reflection glare, even the outline of that bottle you described." Nora felt the air shift. The photograph had guided her this far. Perhaps the negative locked in storage for a century was still waiting to reveal what the mirror had truly seen. The archives of the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts were kept cold, a sterile vault where memory was preserved on fragile glass. Samuel Green led Nora and Lieutenant Olivia Park to a slim box marked in slanted ink, Lewandowski Nov 1919, plates number 2124. His hands trembled as he lifted out one plate and held it under the inspection light. At first, the reversed image looked familiar, the posed family, the rigid father, the smiling mother, the wary infant. But then Samuel tilted the plate, and the truth emerged. His hand, the glass, a vial, plain as day. The mirror betrayed what the staged portrait tried to conceal. In reflection, Edward Fairchild leaned closer than his body had in the frame, his fingers curled around a small bottle. Its cylindrical shape, the narrow neck, even the faint embossed ring, every detail screamed paregoric. Dr. Maya Patel adjusted the digitizer, throwing the enlarged negative across the screen. She pulled the contrast curve higher, and faint lettering appeared, "Dose." Olivia swore under her breath. There it is. He was holding the poison in the middle of the sitting. Nora's throat tightened. For the first time, she felt as if the boy was staring back at her, aware of her century-late witness. Henry's pupils, wide and fixed, seemed not just afraid, but conscious, pleading. She pressed a hand against the table, steadying herself. He knew she whispered. Samuel closed his eyes. "Lillian asked us to preserve these records. Now I understand why." The revelation spread quickly through historical circles, culminating in an exhibition at the Philadelphia Museum of Art photographs as evidence the Fairchild mirror. Visitors filed past glass cases containing Lewandowski's ledger, the stained nursery wallpaper, Lillian's desperate letters, but it was the enlarged projection of the glass negative that stopped them cold. Edward's reflection, the vial in his hand, and Henry's terrified gaze staring out of the mirror. Yet Olivia Park dug deeper. Archival trails revealed Edward's second marriage in 1923 to a widow with 2 children. By 1925, both were dead, the same words doctors had written a dozen times before diagnoses that sounded respectable, but read like alibis. His second wife followed soon after her obituary, citing declining health. Edward himself lived until 1949, untouched by law, cushioned by wealth, his reputation intact. For Nora, the case became more than research. It was testimony that would not be silenced. She stood one evening in the gallery long after the crowd had gone, staring at Henry's face as the projection flickered across the wall. His eyes seemed alive, no longer just a century-old trace of silver halide, but a child demanding recognition. Printed on the wall at the exit was the museum's question. If this were your family's photograph, would you reveal its truth to protect others, or bury it to protect the living? Beneath, in smaller lettering, a line visitors carried with them as they left. Some mirrors don't lie. And in that still image, Henry Fairchild's gaze kept following them, relentless, unforgiving, refusing to fade.